I'm really excited to be able to join you. It's going to be my pleasure to share with you trials and tribulations of painted dogs this year. What we, of course, want to see, all of us in conservation, is babies, new births, animals doing well and undisturbed in their environment. Of course, in our environment, what we often do see more often than this are roads, painted dogs on roads, painted dogs interacting with vehicles, and I'm going to share with you some of the work that we're doing on that front. I'm also going to be taking you on this presentation on the journey of what the pack we called the Musketeer pack. It started some years ago as 3 dogs, and of course, no surprise, we called them the Musketeers. They managed to be joined by some others and became 7 in number, and we were all quite happy that they were going in a straight line. Anyway, more about that later, and I want to share with you, well, where are we? For those of you that don't know, we're basically within a huge conservation area that spans 5 countries called Kaza, the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. And within Kaza, there are a number of national parks and reserves. And the whole idea of Kaza is to provide a landscape where animals can move through without disturbance, in particularly in case of painted dogs, so that they can move through, they can disperse, they can move genes from one population to another and make a complete population. And within Kaza, by the way, we also have a carnivore coalition that is really exciting to be a part of. It's a coalition of a number of conservation biologists focusing on carnivores, and I'm very much a key player within my little part of the world in Zimbabwe within the Kaza Carnivore Coalition. Give you some idea of landscape. My mission within Kaza is to shore up and keep carnivores in particular safe from human-wildlife conflict. My study area is about 6,500 square kilometers, pretty big area. You'll see within there are red lines called roads. And actually, these roads represent to me possibly one of the biggest conservation challenges I've ever faced. Humans driving cars probably caused me more headaches than in the early days when I started in 1988, when every single pack was being shot in as soon as it left Wangi National Park. And I was dealing with redneck ranchers, and I thought that was the greatest conservation challenge anyone could ever face. 13 years later, finally the last shot on painted dogs was fired in Zimbabwe. It took me 13 years. I don't know how long this challenge is going to be to mitigate traffic, but it's one that I'm up for. And with your support, we will make it happen. What are the impact of roads? This is the very road we're talking about. Well, the impact of roads are, of course, habitat loss and degradation, because the roads provide access for, apart from the road itself, taking up huge swathes of habitat. They also mean their access for poaching, access for wood harvesting, illegal wood harvesting. And of course, they decrease the landscape connectivity. If animals either are fearful to cross or just stop crossing, that's going to happen. And then, of course, we've got direct mortality and extirpation, which is the local extinction of various species. And basically, this is happening to a number of species. I mean, for example, this study period of mine was 7 to 8 years. During that study period, I also did a lot of interviews with people, finding out when did you last see not just painted dogs, but other species. And it turns out that, for example, the last bat-eared foxes seen in this whole area, and I'm talking in a contiguous area with this road of 2,000 square kilometers, bat-eared foxes have been extirpated for 8 years. Basically, there are none. Then we have something that's called the vacuum effect, which I'm going to share with you. It's a huge problem for wildlife that are on the road. And of course, wildlife are always going to be on the road. And you might say, well, why don't we tell the elephant to go somewhere else? Well, first of all, I want to make a point. The roads I'm talking about, these are public access roads running through designated wildlife areas. This road runs through a national park. So when you hear, for example, of a new highway that's wanted through the Serengeti and all the conservationists are going up in arms, they are for good reason. Suddenly, easy access is given to motorists to drive wildlife area. Within our study area, let me give some metrics. Vertebrates, We estimate somewhere between 10 to 30 a day are killed, which gives us a number of about 4 to 8,000 killed annually. Across Gaza, that very wide landscape, the probability is that 500,000 are killed. The goal of our project is to mitigate road kills. They're killing thousands. They take no prisoners. There's no size of animal. We've had elephants, snakes, hyenas. Getting at the numbers of how many animals are killed on the road is very difficult because unless it's killed and it's fresh, we don't get to find it. Even when we're doing multiple transects and people are reporting it, they have to report it fast because most of those animals that you're seeing in this picture disappear from that road very quickly. The snakes are taken for traditional medicine, so are the hyenas. The jackal's often the same, and the buffalo's taken for meat. And before we know it, legal or illegally, all these animals disappear. So we can actually do a road transect looking for wildlife and roadkill and say, oh, we've only spotted 10 on this particular transect. Well, the fact is that there were probably 20, but they've all disappeared off the road. And in fact, we had a case where an impala was killed. We were there. We came from our hiding spot. We sleep overnight by the road many times. As we came out, there was an impala just been hit. It was still unfortunately quaking. It was too dangerous a place to stop, so I drove literally 200 yards up the road, turned around, came back, and as I came back, all I saw was the truck opening its door and throwing the impala in. Had I not been there the moment it was hit, we never would have known. Share with you some more. Obviously, we're focusing on painted dogs, and this was a pack that denned possibly about 10, 12 kilometers away from the road. And we monitored it every single day in June 2020 with her pups. Picasso from the Chundu pack was happy with her pups. We were always monitored by camera trap. To August, they went nomadic. They went onto the road. The pups were not even 4 months old. All 5 pups were killed by traffic. And 2 males and the alpha female, and only 2 males survived. And of course, that was no pack. This is what we're up against. And here I mentioned the vacuum effect. Here we have a pack who started life in 2018. Every year we monitor every single pack. Every single year we're collecting these data and passing them on. There's this one, if you look on the left, there are 5 packs. 1 year later, 2019, there are only 4 packs, and there are 4 different packs. What we're actually saying is that all those 4 with crosses through them actually were extirpated in between 2018 and 2019. This pattern has been repeated year in, year out since 2013. What actions can we take? Well, we've got humps, we've got overpasses, we've got underpasses, public awareness, signage, enforcement. There are a number of options that are open to us, some of which have automatically been eradicated. Well, for example, humps. We've categorically been told by Ministry of Roads that they are not an option. And I'm going to share with you what happens when we try to put small road signs up, slow down, or there's a hump ahead. Well, overpasses and underpasses are mentioned. Actually, when you think about it, we are in Africa. Government doesn't have money to be putting up overpasses and underpasses. When you think about it also, it may be fine in certain countries where all we're dealing with is maybe wolves and deer. In Africa, we'd be talking a herd of 200 elephants, and actually whether we even have the capacity to build them. We have been collecting over the last 5 years speed data to get some idea of the problem. And this is how we've been doing it. We monitor traffic. At the moment, we're using a newer method where we have to have 2 vehicles with 8 people at different locations that are maybe 10 miles apart. And we record speed and obviously the companies and everything else. It gives you some idea about how we're doing it. But more importantly, what are we collecting? We're trying to get an idea of data. For example, at the moment, 90% of private cars are over the speed limit. We've got overall speeding is 85% over the speed limit. This is insane. It has to be mitigated. We have tried putting up road signs. There were no road signs telling people what the speed was, so we fought with Ministry of Roads, got permission to put up speed signs. We had a big event by it to try and create a national awareness, and we were all very happy. Of course, that began our private war with elephants. Because unfortunately, as I said, elephants will not work well with overpasses and underpasses. They also seemingly do not like our road signs. And wherever we have road signs, the elephants decide to knock them down. So then we tried covering all our road signs with barbed wire to try and deter the elephants. It didn't matter what we did, the elephants trashed our road signs. So this is just one of the challenges we face. Even if we were to try mitigating traffic with speed hump signs, the elephants would soon remove all our good work. All we can have are really big billboards that are on huge metal posts. The collaring. Well, dogs don't know where the boundary is between Botswana. So by having collars on, satellite collars obviously, we can start an alert system. Let people know where the dogs are. Dogs are entering a city. But we also do the same. We use the collars to mitigate human-wildlife conflict by visiting communities. When these painted dogs, because obviously they've got huge territory, when they visit communities, we go there as well if we can. And if we definitely go the next day. And often the communities will say, oh, what are you doing here? I'll say, well, the dogs were here yesterday. Did you see them? And they'd say, no, we didn't, which is a very great reinforcing tool. So that's working with communities. We also use the collars as well to try and get an idea of where we need to intensify our efforts. What are we trying to do at the moment? We are doing camera trapping. Our objective is to use camera trap to get the daily activity of the wildlife. If we don't know what time of the day the wildlife is on the road, it's easy for us to get time of day when humans are on the road and traffic volume. That's much easier to get. We'll never get to the bottom of it. So we've been using camera trap data, which obviously comes with dates and times and even the temperature, because the intention is we want to develop a model as to when animals are crossing the road. Now, at the moment, what a model I'm going to show you, we have very limited data, but we put it together to show you what it looks like once we get the full data set. Camera trapping takes thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures. Going through them and the hours that it take means that we need a lot of data. Of course, we also, on our camera traps, we've suddenly realized that we also have, as I call it, the selfie brigade. It seems that not only humans are obsessed with selfies. So with the camera trapping, with the traffic data that we have and with the limited camera trap, this is how we intend to be using the thing. This is a model with a limited number of data showing the difference between herbivore and carnivore patterns and the daily risk for mammalian animals. And then we've added something here called traffic overlap risk, which is what we're looking at the moment. The traffic risk is not just a question of traffic's there on a certain date or time. There are times of day when traffic are seriously impaired, and most of those times of day are just before sunset to sunrise. People think they can see when they drive fast, they think their reaction times are good, but actually when we dig deep into the literature, we are realizing this is not the case. And we realize that we have to add an extra risk factor for the fact that humans themselves, though they don't believe it, are seriously compromised driving during the night and twilight. We package this together just to show you where we're going. We still need thousands and thousands and thousands of more hours of camera trapping. I want to share with you, this is where we aim to be going with this. This is what the ultimate model will look like, where we will be able to inform conservation decision, i.e. do we have traffic curfews? What time of day the risk is highest? And as you can see here, there's 3-hour window in the morning and an 8-hour window at night, where at the moment, data will change this and we need more data to be able to produce something like this reliably that we can take to the authorities and say, between this time of day and this time of day, you need to be careful. These are when all the animals are going to get killed. Now I'm going to share with you more about the Musketeer pack. In September 2019, there were 8. They were on the road. And then an event happened. 3 got hit by a vehicle. What was the knock-on effect of that? 3 were hit by a vehicle and the pack was now 5. Well, in the case of painted dogs, 5 becomes 3. 5 is too small a pack to raise pups successfully. 5 dogs are needed for hunting. When we had Operation Anne, which was in November, we caught up with the pack and the alpha female whelped. We were there close to the whelping with camera traps, as you can see. And on our first night, we heard this intense screaming that was unbelievable. It was horrible. My field guy, MK, said, what's that noise? How we monitor them, we stay back from the den. So obviously we can't see it. The cameras can do that for us, but we can hear what's going on. And I said, I've only ever heard it once. I said, the alpha female must be starving and she's struggling. She can't feed the pups and the pack's not managing to bring enough food. And when we looked at the camera trap picture the next day, we could see that she was indeed starving. Basically, she was at risk of dying from eclampsia and the pups were all going to die of starvation. Here was a first. We contacted national parks because we wanted to intervene. And you can't say that this wasn't a human caused events. And of course, it does also raise a question when a species has become nearly extinct because of human activity that we can't intervene. I have a problem with that statement because it's nature. This wasn't nature. Nature was 3 dogs were killed on the road by cars. So the alpha female was skin and bone. And so we contacted national parks and said, please, can we intervene? And their response to us was, well, what do you want to do? Dig them out of the den? And I said, no. I said, that doesn't solve anything. Do we save 1-day-old pups by digging them out of the den? If we're lucky, we may get them to survive. I said, then we've got to get them back into the wild. We said, no, we want to do something that had never been done before, which was to embark on a supplementary feed program. National parks, wonderful. They immediately said, absolutely, Greg, no problem. They said, we'll cut through any red tape. We're going to call it a research project, which of course it was. So what was our mission was to once a week, we got something like nearly 100 pounds of meat near to the den. The dogs found it, started to feed. This became a regular event. We still stayed out of sight, would appear once a week. It was a huge operation because we had to carry the meat without allowing it to touch the ground. The den was about 2 miles from the road. So we had to hand carry the meat and then place it down so that we didn't alert predators. As you can see, the pups were really fed well. Now you may say, God, Greg, you overdid it. Well, here's a fact. That belly there is exactly the same as what painted dogs feed their pups in the wild when they're not under any other stress. Those pups have to eat, grow, eat. They've got very high metabolism. This is just a picture from that den. You can see the dogs have cleaned up a car because they've got the scapula there. This just happened to be my favorite dog. I called him Digger because while the other pups were doing their own thing, he'd be just digging holes. They went nomadic, and this was the last picture we got of Anne with her collar at the den before she went nomadic, 10th of February. She was obviously not skin and bone. You could see how she'd filled out. We were very proud. And then we heard nothing till March 2020, when there was a glimpse of the pack. And the collar decided to fail. And the last fix we had was the pack heading towards the main road in Botswana. Obviously, with great trepidation, we waited. We checked all our camera traps on the Zimbabwe side, kept checking them. And we had to wait for 17 months until finally they showed up on our camera traps. As you can imagine, my team was ecstatic. Well, we were all ecstatic. We were over the moon. MK came back and said, guess what we found? Guess what we found? And even better than that, the next 12 hours after that first sighting, we got this picture in the camera traps. So it meant the 5 pups that we had intervened with by feeding the pack, all those 5 pups survived. The pack was 10 adults and 5 pups. Well, we might be able to say, well, let's pat ourselves on the back. This is great. We finally got a pack that raised pups to adulthood, which had not been happening because these pups just kept getting wiped out on the main road. This year, the Musketeer pack trumped themselves, and they had 7 pups, all of which are alive, one of which has been recently reported with a broken leg that we think was hit by a car. In fact, from my other study in Wangi many, many years, broken legs on pups were almost non-existent unless there were roads involved. Just share with you a few of our strategies in process. We're trying to develop a WhatsApp helpline. We're trying to get laws together. We want docket books for reporting roadkill. We want dead or alive apps to share across the landscape to identify hotspots. We are working with government and courts. It's that, of course, we are aware that we need to get changes in the law, changes in speed limits, because ultimately, at the end of the day, in national park areas, we have to mitigate the traffic and not the wildlife. And we want to support the police, and we're working on flyers because there's no good putting small signage up, otherwise our friends, the elephants, will have a go at it. Making new friends, we've got partnerships with the police who've designed this sign that they want to go up as soon as we can get everything in place. We're working on slow down signs. We can't have a wildlife area full of signage because ultimately the elephants will say they disagree anyway. These are some of the strategies that we're using. And this year, the new pups, a new generation, a new chapter. We're excited. We are working on it. It's a long uphill battle. We've still got a lot of work to do. Still got a lot of camera trapping to do. But basically, we never give up. And together, we can triumph. And thank you, partners. Thank you for your help. Thank you very much for your support. And without you, we'll never make anything happen. Ultimately, as they say, your support will be their survival.